And I think a critical thing to understand is that obese and overweight people have a significantly higher increase of dementia and Alzheimer's. So even outside of blood sugar control itself, there's a higher inflammatory process going on in the body. There's other things at play purely besides blood sugar.
This is Generation Health. We bring you the latest news, cutting-edge research, and time-tested best practices, helping you live a longer, healthier life. Joey, you brought a couple of articles, and I've seen a bunch of these too. It seems like there's a whole series of different areas of research that are starting to overlap related to neurological disorders like Alzheimer's and diabetes and various actions to help remediate all these things. What are you seeing? What is this article that the first one you want to jump off with?
Yeah. So these two articles really grabbed me when I looked at them. And on one hand, I kind of thought, well, type 2 diabetes is bad. If you have it, you know it's terrible. You've already been told this by your doctor. But I think to me, and if you're listening to this podcast, and for me as a pharmacist, when I'm talking to people and giving advice, I just think it's so important to add color and context to a disease like this, especially because type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle disease to a large extent. Everything from the medications you're taking may be expensive or may have side effects, to your diet, obviously, your exercise level. So on one hand, it's a lifestyle disease. On the other hand, it's not a feel disease. So in the sense of, well, I'm depressed, or I have this injury, or this other disease that I feel, it's insidious.
It's objective and measured.
Yes. So you're basically, I guess what I'm trying to get to is people are having to make decisions on what they eat for meals every day, and how often they exercise based on something they can't really feel or see unless they go to a doctor's office. So that's why I thought it was important to add a little bit of a feel component to what may be going on in diabetes as you're deciding to manage it. I think what we've known for a while, even though it's still not forefront, whenever you talk about type 2 diabetes, you talk about, kidney function, eye functioning, increased incidence of cardiovascular disease, CV events, stroke. Those are kind of them, and they're obviously critical and important, but this one, the Alzheimer's, the brain functioning, and even a level below Alzheimer's, so to say, of day-to-day functioning is where I thought this was really interesting.
Okay. So this article is great because it's got a summary right at the top. It says, new research reveals that type 2 diabetes may impair the brain's reward and memory processing in ways that mirror early Alzheimer's disease. The study focuses on the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, a brain region responsible for motivation and emotional regulation, and its interaction with the hippocampus. In diabetic rodent models, researchers observed muted reward signals and impaired memory processing linked to the elevated blood sugar levels. These changes may help explain the elevated Alzheimer's risk in people with diabetes and point to new avenues for early intervention.
Yeah, a couple things besides the obvious grab me there. Muted reward signals. So that ultimately is relating to what's very common in Alzheimer's, even in very early depression, lack of anhedonia, lack of finding pleasure in things. And again, this is not going to flip overnight. You're not going to go one day and then change the other day. This is going to be a slow process, a spectrum. The other thing is impaired memory processing. So again, not a night and day change. And over time, a lot of it we link to, well, I'm getting older, all those things, and they're all true. But when you start to maybe get the level deeper of what is going on and what could be a factor there, it was short term. Yes, they looked at mice, and yes, this is one of those studies that ends with need more studies. But again, right. that's where these start. So they found that in short term, in the mice, they elicited changes in short term elevated blood glucose related to their memory functioning and their seeking of reward. So basically mice are going to be a little more primal in the sense of how much reward are they getting from going after this food or whatever, the treat, the sweet.
Yep.
Those mice had less interest over time with elevated blood glucose. So the depression itself. So who links type 2 diabetes to depression? And again, so many of these things, multifactorial. It's not like, oh, you know what? I've been depressed and it's not this terrible thing that happened. It's my type 2 diabetes. No, it's not about that.
Right.
But as you're trying to piece together a difficult puzzle to a difficult issue, knowing what all those pieces are, and maybe what's one that is very hidden in the center, or not really forefront of people's minds whenever you're talking about it, I think was important. And I think too, just the day-to-day functioning of the memory processing, critical here. So one other thing that I really liked, that one of the researchers gave a quote about, was Alzheimer's disease goes undetected for decades because our brains are good at finding ways to compensate. Before diagnosis, people behave normally despite having changes in information processing. We even observed that in this study. So again, back to the spectrum aspect of dealing with things like this, just the damage to the brain and the short-term memory functioning. And then you look at, there's a 65% higher incidence of Alzheimer's in people with type 2 diabetes.
Oh my goodness.
So when you look at maybe arresting something like this a little earlier, I just, again, think was really eye-opening to me.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like, as you said, this study, this is from the University of Nevada, that the punchline at the end of all of this is, hey guys, type 2 diabetes is really bad, and you need to do everything in your power to prevent it and then mitigate its effects if you have it.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's back to kind of what I opened with. I think, again, you're just an individual just trying to make decisions day to day, and they feel okay. And yeah, they know that it could be bad for their kidneys, but their kidneys are fine. And yes, they know that they're at an increased rate for cardiovascular disease, but their cholesterol is good, and they go to the doctor. So everything's okay. And maybe these dietary decisions, maybe this exercise isn't not important yet. Maybe I'll keep an eye on it. Or this memory thing, I'm just getting older. Well, maybe that's how it manifested in your field. Maybe maybe you have a history of it in your family, so your incidence is already higher. What can you do to limit that? How early it comes on in your life is obviously critical, because that's something that, as you're piecing together the decisions you're making or how you're discussing with a loved one, I think is really, really important to understand and know. Okay.
All right. So the second article here, this is about a JAMA Neurology study, just came out, hot off the presses. Here's an article about it. It says diabetes drugs like Ozempic or Jardiance may slash Alzheimer's risk. So this is the GLP-1s and the what are they?
SGLT-2s.
Okay. So those are the two big classifications of drugs.
Yes.
And it's worth pointing out that the GLP-1s have been used for diabetes for a decade or more before they became the popular weight loss drugs.
In its earlier versions and the daily versions. Yes.
Yeah.
You are correct. So that's modern day is the Ozempics, Wegovy's, all those that you hear about for weight loss.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Yes, they are indicated for and used successfully in type 2 diabetes.
And this data is said it's more than 92,000 people with type 2 diabetes. So again, it links directly back to that article about type 2 diabetes rewiring the brain like early Alzheimer's. In fact, it may become early Alzheimer's.
Yeah. And so we kind of, again, have looked at that, but now this is going a little more specific in looking at these two classes of drugs. So the SGLT2s are the Jardiance and Farxiga, just regular tablets that you take, totally different mechanism. But they're lumping them together here because of the data they ended up getting. But they're lumping them together because these are the two new classes. These are the ones that, relatively speaking in medicine terms, are new. These are the ones that then, warrant the most attention in terms of side effects, long-term benefits, and downsides. And they're the most money. Yeah. So, for patients, what a lot of them are paying serious money for these. What is the benefit versus these other diabetic drugs that have been out for a long time? So related to this issue specifically, related to Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, so a little more broad. Okay, they looked at, like you said, over 90,000 patients. Okay, and they They made sure that the criteria they took away were anybody with prior diagnosis of dementia. So they got down to eligible patients, and then they compared, it was basically a 50-50 split between type 2 diabetics who were on one of these two classes and type 2 diabetics who are on the older versions of type 2 diabetic medications, metformins, glipizide, glimepiride, those
traditional treatments.
Yes. So what they found was that in these type 2 diabetics, the group that was on either the GLP-1 receptor agonist or the SGLT-2 had significantly decreased risk of Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's related dementia compared to the group that was on the older medications.
Wow.
So it's very interesting because you assume that both groups are relatively similar in how it was controlled. Okay. So that's why this is one of those studies that's going to end with more studies are needed.
Obviously.
This is a study looking back at data. It's not a, random, double-blind study that we recommend, but this it was so large in scale that it had valuable information.
The article here I have says specifically GLP-1s were linked to a 33% lower risk of dementia, and SGLT2s were linked to a 43% lower risk, but that other diabetes medications did not move the needle at all.
Yeah. So it's really interesting about what the mechanism of these are. It's obviously these are all different mechanisms of how they're working.
Yeah.
Why these two newer ones and what they share together in terms of their mechanism, why it would be more protective to the brain. We don't know. Again, that's what we need to find out. But I think in a practical sense, what to do with this information, a lot of people have been type 2 diabetic for a long time. And they may have been on metformin and glipizide for years, and it's cheap. It's $5, $10. And now they have to inject themselves once a week. Or now they're on Jardiance and it's got this high copay. And you may say, well, why am I doing this? And I think it's just important to understand that in this case, not only have they been shown to have increased blood sugar control, but even comparing an apples to apples related to Alzheimer's and dementia, significant difference, like you mentioned, the numbers between the two groups.
Yeah.
And it was interesting too that between the two groups they didn't see a huge difference, but between the two different study groups they did, the older drugs and the newer drugs.
Yeah, I'll take a 33% lower risk of dementia. That sounds like a good thing.
Absolutely. But I think to me, yes, it's interesting, and we want to learn the mechanisms, and that's what will be found in terms of why. The more the why. But I maybe it's my perspective because I see the financial impact of these drugs and have the conversations a lot of times about, is this really worth it?
Yeah.
Metformin was doing okay. I know my buddy's on metformin. He pays $5 a month. Why am I paying $100? Why am I paying $50? And I think to see something like this, again, as you're making decisions and trying to, plan your care, I think was important to understand and really interesting.
I remember we went over an article just recently about the blood glucose affecting the brain and that its receptivity, insulin resistance, the brain becoming insulin resistant. I assume this is related to all of that. Or do we have any idea if
could be
perhaps that's what's going on?
I think in this case, because that was more related to controlled and uncontrolled.
Right.
We're assuming in these two groups.
That's true. It's controlled in both.
The control, yes. So there's some protective aspect neurologically related to the two mechanisms of this class. And I think that's where the next level of research would be, is how is this happening? Because then whenever you start to look into those things, potentially you can find other uses for them, other reasons maybe why somebody would need them, especially if they're more borderline in blood sugar, et cetera.
And speaking of other uses, the GLP-1s, this being 9 years of data, I assume that again, not the pharmacist, the old formulations were not as effective at weight loss, correct?
Yes.
That wasn't why they were prescribed. They were prescribed for blood sugar control.
Yes.
And there was some weight loss, but it was not anywhere near what people are experiencing now.
And I think a critical thing to understand is that obese and overweight people have a significantly higher increase incidence of dementia and Alzheimer's. So even outside of blood sugar control itself, being obese, being overweight does lead to, there's there's many different mechanisms, but there's a higher inflammatory process going on in the body. There's other things at play purely besides blood sugar.
Right.
So we know Mounjaro and Wegovy have significant impact on weight.
Yeah.
And then also Jardiance relative to the older class. So Jardiance is not quite where, the GLP-1s are relative to weight loss, but you do get weight loss with Jardiance and Farxiga, that class. You don't see that with metformin and glipizide. I think that's a critical component of why these, maybe comparing two groups with equal blood sugar control, you see a difference because of the weight loss impact that goes on relative to inflammation and the signals to the brain.
And so it's also reasonable to guess, just to guess, but that folks using these drugs now in the higher weight loss dosages who are also using them for their diabetes are going to see perhaps an even better protective effect.
Could be.
Reasonable to guess?
Yeah, especially relative, because it ends up becoming somewhat relative to in the sense of if 7.5 milligrams of Mounjaro gets you within weight versus 15, that would be something to research.
Yep.
Would that have any impact at all? Or is it just the weight? So yeah, I think that's critical to get out of this, that they have the data. It would have been interesting to put it in here now, but relative to weights, relative to BMIs of these two groups, was that an impact?
It says in one spot, it says GLP-1s are known to reduce neuroinflammation, improve insulin signaling in the brain, and promote the growth of new nerve cells, neurogenesis. Similarly, SGLT-2s may protect the brain by improving cerebral blood flow, reducing oxidative stress, and enhancing mitochondrial activity. So this is fascinating.
Yes, absolutely.
Really great news. I love finding out things like this, and I love seeing these connections as we discover more and more about all this stuff.
Exactly.
There's still so much we don't know. It's nice to learn a thing or two. So many of our products are designed for a particular use case. They're supplements. They're meant to help fix deficiencies. And whether it's, neurological stuff or physiological stuff, we help folks in those different ways. Because we have things for a whole host of different issues, nobody needs everything that we sell. By definition, that's the idea. This is another one of those products that I personally use. Do not go without. My sons use it. My wife uses this. What are we talking about?
Creatine Essentials is the latest offering in what you were referring to here. Creatine is a naturally occurring compound that's found actually in small amounts in some food like red meat and fish. It's also produced by our bodies. Primarily, it is stored in the muscle where it plays its major role in energy production, which is specifically the system of the ATP and phosphocreatine system. You can basically think of ATP again as the direct fuel source for intense or any sort of muscle contractions. When you perform short, intense bursts of activity like sprinting or lifting weights, jumping, your body more rapidly depletes its ATP reserve, and creatine can help quickly regenerate this ATP, allowing us to hopefully sustain these high intensity efforts for longer durations.
That makes sense.
So that's the gist of it. Much more sciencey than that, but over the years we've had different variations of creatine. We had already a creatine monohydrate product for sale on the website. We just really switched to this one just because it was a better value. The most recent one that we carried was a creatine monohydrate. So if you feel strange switching to this one, don't. Just know that you're getting a little bit better of a price. It's creatine monohydrate. Monohydrate is the form that, people have tried time and time again to replace and make a better version, a more absorbable version, one that you can buffer, one that you can this. But again, time has proven that this is still the way. And until that time comes, we're going to stick with creatine monohydrate.
Cool. So this is a change primarily to save money for folks.
Exactly.
That's pretty important these days.
That's
okay.
Right. Occasionally, we can mix that in for sure. We have in preparation for this, I did review an older creatine segment that we did, And I feel that the general creatine discussion that we had still applies. So if you want to nerd out a little more on creatine, I still think that's the way to go. In broad strokes, we can talk a little bit more about who creatine supplementation is for.
Okay. Well, then tell me, Dante, who is creatine supplementation for?
So similar to protein supplementation or whey protein powders, whatever, it's not just for the elite athletes, although they do stand to benefit from having a little more protein on hand, if you will.
Yeah.
Again, athletes and lifters can certainly benefit. Any activity requiring bursts of power and strength. And what we've seen is even these longer endurance activities, those individuals participating in those types of activities stand to benefit as well.
And for those people, and not giving numbers specifically, but the experience is that they can work a little harder for a little longer. Is that the idea?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. You can even think of it as on your bench press, you think of a bench press as a pretty short, powerful movement. You might have a set of 5 or 10 reps, and something like this, I guess it depends on the metric you're looking for, but we've seen benefits of upwards of 10 to 15%.
Wow.
In responders. So that's an extra rep. That's an extra few seconds you can shave off a given time trial or
Sure.
However, my math is maybe not mathing, but you understand my point.
I can carry a few more bags of groceries from the trunk to the house without a second trip.
Exactly.
That's the goal.
Exactly. And so the idea is while it sounds very small in benefit, if you continue to improve your capacity to work or to get things done, to perform better physically, then we can realize more of the health benefits, the overall performance benefits. So it is certainly centered towards those aiming for a edge in performance. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, that spectrum of health to performance blurs a little bit. And so that's why I don't like to just fully say, well, unless you're training for a powerlifting meet, you shouldn't take creatine. It's a little gray. We all like to think of ourselves as capable still or athletes or former athletes. And so it certainly covers more of a broad spectrum of people.
Very cool.
Also creatine, you mentioned I guess we talked about the quick burst in performance improvements and those types of exercises. Beyond exercise, it can help with recovery to a degree. So if your exercise is a little more intense, the hope is that because of a few of these mechanisms at play, that you can recover better session to session. There are some cognitive benefits being touted around the internet right now.
Yeah,
that's kind of all I'll say. I'm hopeful that there's going to be more solid evidence behind that, but something to keep in mind, and something that certainly is not a bad thing to be floating around. But to think that a scoop of creatine is going to make you feel like, you just
10% smarter.
You took the limitless pill, then I don't know. Maybe that's not the best expectations.
So the cognitive benefits have not been fully vetted out, certainly not to the level that the physical benefits have.
Yes.
But know that is being explored, and it does seem to be promising.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Exactly. We mentioned, again, creatine monohydrate, just to summarize, is the most well-researched form of creatine. It's been around for decades, hundreds of scientific trials. Benefits for strength, power, muscle mass, and recovery are well documented. Now, there are some responders and non-responders with creatine.
Interesting.
It's hard to know exactly where you stand. My understanding overall is that it might have to do with a few factors that are out of our control. Some people just have varying levels of creatine in their muscle at sort of baseline. Mm-hmm. So that maybe plays into who's responding and who's not. There are people who maybe just don't absorb it as well, and therefore they don't see the benefit. In these trials, those that responded, most people that have responded to creatine, they also had the blood levels in the level in the muscle through biopsy that showed that there was actually an increase in the reserves of creatine, more or less. So for whatever reason, there are people who it's not kind of going where it's supposed to, and they're still fleshing a lot of that out. But don't really have to worry about that, in my opinion, because there's really nothing in the research as far as it being a causing a downside to performance.
Say, is there any downside to trying it?
In terms of like purely performance metrics, not that I'm aware of. Now, as far as it's a good place to pop in some side effects. Now, more with the individuals who have experimented with loading doses. So instead of the usual 3 to 5 grams once a day, there are people who have done 20.
That's the recommended way to do it. It's 3 to 5 grams once a day in perpetuity, theoretically.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And those that have done the 5 times, 6 times as much as that over the course of a week or 5 days, that's the most likely scenario that you'll see some of the bloating, GI distress, nausea, diarrhea. Even at that, it's a very low percentage. But your very kind of standard dosing is not often a reason for concern. There's a lot of people who are concerned about how this affects kidney function. People get confused with creatine and creatinine. There's just a few letters different. Now, creatine does get converted to creatinine by the kidneys and is excreted as a waste product, more or less. But that's simply just because you have more creatine floating through the blood and in the muscle. And so it's gonna reflect somewhere along the line. There are other tests. There's one test specifically that you can look at that has maybe a little more of gives you a little more accurate insight into if this is actually causing kidney injury, creatine supplementation. And anytime that's been looked at, there was very little instance of this doing any sort of harm to the kidneys.
Makes sense. Because
creatine sort of gets mentioned in this performance-oriented anabolic sort of discussion, of course, it gets wrapped into I heard creatine causes hair loss, and I heard it does this. And at this point, I'm not really aware that there's a strong signal towards hair loss, for example. So a lot of guys and gals are concerned about that at this point in time, we don't really see a need for major concern. There's also the concern of increasing water retention, which again, I feel like I heard that when I was 12 years old and when the creatine discussions were getting floated at our old gym. But it does not always lead to this, especially in the long term. There's no significant changes in the long term with total body water. Now it might increase some temporary changes in intracellular water, but that's not really going to be reflected in how you look, how you feel. So I think a lot of that's kind of gotten misconstrued. And if anything, I may not be saying this 100% correctly, but those who notice maybe a temporary kind of influx in their body weight, maybe due to teeny tiny bit of water changes at the level of the muscle, that is maybe a good thing.
That's a good thing. That's
a good thing. And it shows that maybe there is some response happening. And in the back of your mind, you know that sort of that short-term fluctuation in weight will likely normalize. And again, there's some signaling and there's some different things happening at the level of the muscle and the level of those cells that can signify maybe there's some growth and some change in the muscle happening that we are ultimately shooting for. Very cool. All right. Well, we touched on it briefly. How does one use the Creatine Essentials? So I feel that the loading phase is generally not required. Yeah. If you anecdotally, you had a cousin 25 years ago that swears by it and they loaded it and then they were breaking school records or something, then go for it. You know what I mean? If you want to try the loading dose, you can do that. Again, this smaller daily dose of creatine at 3 to 5 grams per day, whether it's in the morning or at night, is adequate to, again, the goal is to increase your stores of creatine sort of at baseline, and that should get you there no problem. It's important to highlight, I think, that both males and females can use this. Again, because my wife does. Yeah, I think, again, maybe I don't want to speak out of turn here, but it feels like because creatine often gets mentioned in this like performance enhancing supplement realm, that it's like, well, of course we wouldn't want this group to use it, or maybe women shouldn't use. You know, it's like, well, sure, there may be pregnancy and really young kids and certain populations you might want to give pause, but just kind of your average healthy male, healthy female, I see really no difference in why one would or wouldn't take it. Especially if your be a good option. Body already creates it. Mm-hmm. It makes sense that there's nothing wrong with having just a little bit more in there. Exactly. And I don't think that I think that even older adults who maybe are just starting to exercise again, to maybe add a protein supplement, to add a creatine supplement, something like that just adds to the almost like the ritual, the practice of, hey, I go to the gym or I go outside to walk or I do my thing, I go play pickleball or whatever it is, that when I'm done, I have my shake, I have my like little scoop of creatine. Just there's something to those kind of healthy behaviors that aren't just behaviors. They're helping hopefully create a little more muscle mass, create a little more adaptation, and ultimately help you in the long run.
I love it. That's so fantastic. All right. That's it on this. Creatine Essentials, available now in our store, askjoedimatteo.com. That's it for us. Thank you so much. If you liked what you heard, please share the show. That is the best thing you can do to help us out. Also, go to our website, askjoedimatteo.com. You can't get GLP-1s there, but you can find all sorts of wonderful natural supplements that can help in a bajillion different ways. And that is quantified. We counted it. It is a bajillion. That is also where you can find our past shows, the Ask the Pharmacist show, the Ask Joe DiMatteo show. You can find the past episodes of this show and sign up for our email newsletter. There's a bunch of great stuff there. Big thanks, as always, to everybody that helps make this show happen. That's Josiah Schweinberg. That's Joey DiMatteo. I'm Tyler Andrews. We'll see you next time.